The year is 2010 and a small Italian company called M2Tech releases the very first digital-to-digital converter, which was called Hi-Phase. I reviewed that one back in the day in my mother language, and I do believe that overnight it became an instant success, as it proved that the USB connection of your digital-to-analog converter was not the last frontier. History was made that day as a new category of products was born, which were digital-to-digital converters, or DDCs for short, and many companies started making their own DDCs shortly after that. I'm pretty sure that some of you are still using a USB connection in between your DAC and PC, Mac or laptop, but if you want to improve the sound of your setup without changing your DAC, then this video is definitely for you. While it might look that I'll be comparing 4 DACs shortly, you are mistaken, because today I'm taking a closer look at a 3rd generation DDC by Matrix Audio, which is called X-SPDIF3, which is the little guy right here. I didn't try their 3rd generation DDC, but I owned their 2nd generation X-SPDIF3, which was working together with an X-Sabre Pro DAC, followed by an Audio GD Master 9 headphone amplifier. For a few years, that was my setup. It was just outstanding. That X-Sabre Pro was very detailed sounding, but the unit that brought an absolute silence in my setup and that added so many layers of sounds, making a 2.5D sounding DAC into a 3D sounding unit, was definitely the X-SPDIF3. I liked everything about that one, except that it was slightly on the brighter side of neutral, and combined that with a neutral sounding DAC, and in no time I was searching for a warmer, meteor sounding amplifier, and that's exactly how I arrived at that Master 9 headphone amplifier. Along the years, I've tried many DDCs, 1st and 2nd generation Hi-Phase, AD Labs Mars, AudioByte Hydra X, AudioByte Hydra Z plus ZPN power supply, which at that time was the absolute best DDC that I tried, but it was too rich for my blood. Then I tried the X-SPDIF3, the Singster SU6, Musician Phoenix, and then Philips Gaia, so I had plenty of experience with DDCs because I was constantly trying to improve the sound of my USB DACs. Design-wise, I just want to say that it's milled from a single block of aluminum. And if you want the slickest looking DDC out there, then I believe this one is the one to get. It's very small, it will not occupy a lot of desktop space, and you can use it near your DAC, on top of your DAC, just exactly as you want. Its milled case is very heavy, it weighs 1 kilo, but you need to know that it wasn't made only to impress you, it wasn't made only to have this solid build quality, but also to suppress any wireless interference and to suppress any vibrations coming from within its electronics. When it comes to inputs and outputs, as you can see, it has just a single input, and that is USB type B. It is bus powered, so you don't need additional power to power this one. But if you want a better performance, I do recommend using a linear power supply, a 12-volt linear power supply. If I would recommend you one, that would be the FIO PL50. I used that one with this one, and it worked amazing, slightly elevating its performance, so that is a very nice upgrade, and it's not a very expensive one. When it comes to outputs, as you can see, it has coaxial, optical, AAC, and a very special I2S output via HDMI. But please don't mistake its I2S output with HDMI, because they have nothing in common. Sadly, I was unable to open this one up. As you can see, it doesn't have any screws. I do believe that 4 screws were hidden just below its rubber feet, but since I cannot remove these rubber feet, I'll rely on a single photo which I found online. About a third of its internal space is occupied by the power supply. I see several low noise voltage regulators, filtering caps, and a switching regulator, which should clean up the mess even without a linear transformer. In the middle of the board, I see an XMOS digital receiver and then Xilinx Spartan FPGA infused with Matrix own code, which is monitoring clock's performance and performs frequency division. 2 femtosecond clocks from AccuSilicon are also present, working as reference source clocks that will restore the timing coming from the USB input. Before moving on to sound performance, first we need to understand what is a DDC and if we need something like this. I have already explained how a DDC is working in my Musician Phoenix review, and you can check that video somewhere around here. In much simple terms, if you have already a high performance DAC, then the source that feeds that DAC is very important. It's equally important. And of course, a DDC or a source for your DAC can elevate the performance of your DAC, or that source can downgrade the performance of your DAC, depending on how good that is. Some people are completely bypassing the problems coming with the USB connection by using some wireless streamers that are lowering the noise floor, that are providing a better timing, and a DDC is working more or less the same, so it's very, very similar. And you can use something like this in between a PC and a DAC, in between a wireless streamer and a DAC, and there are many other use cases. And of course, you want to invest money in something like this to maximize the performance of your DAC. When the USB standard was introduced in '96, it was made for peripheral devices like mice, keyboards, printers, but it was not really made as a real-time data transfer. The problem is with audio, everything is real-time data transfer, meaning that USB connection was flowed from the get-go. Another issue is that our PCs, laptops have switching mode power supplies. They can have voltage spikes, current spikes, and have a noisier power supply. And of course, all that goes through USB cables directly into our USB DACs. Another issue of the USB connection is that the internal clocks of your PC or laptops are doing a handshake with the clocks inside our DACs, and usually those clocks are not so great, so the performance goes down. With a DDC, you have much better clocks. You no longer have the noise coming from the USB, so theoretically it should improve the performance of our DACs, especially when used via that I2S connection. I2S is a native interface to most DA chips because there is no need to encode the clock and data into a single signal, which makes it technically superior to any other digital input like coaxial, optical, or USB. The problem of the I2S connection is that nobody standardized it yet, so it can work great in between this one and SMSL DAC, but it might not work in between this one and a topping DAC. Luckily, Matrix Audio offered us different I2S configurations, 4 configurations more exactly, and with some deep switches found on its back, you can choose in between 4 types of I2S connections. In the stock configuration, it worked great with Gustard, SMSL, and Rockna DACs, so I never touched those. I used an I2S connection in between the little guy and the SMSL D400EX, and with the help of my wife, I was able to compare the USB connection coming from my PC with the I2S connection coming from the X-SPDIF3. And after a few rounds of comparisons, the difference was very clear. It was a massive difference. And from 6 rounds of comparisons, I always pick the I2S connection. And let me explain you why. So first of all, a few DDCs are adding a flavor of their own, making the sound thinner or warmer, fuller bodied, but that was not really the case with this guy right here, and in many ways it sounded like a Synxer SU6, which is exactly like that, very linear, is not interplaying with the bass, mid-range and treble, and just leaves it exactly as like that. But there was a massive, big difference in terms of timing, decay of the notes, layering, and noise floor. So those 4 was something that I felt via the I2S connection. Although the soundstage didn't expand, I felt that there was more air in between the notes, and that somehow improved the layering of my music. For example, when I was listening to some live rock tunes. Via USB there was a very defined distance in between the drummer and the vocalist, but via I2S that space basically doubled, so the sound was much deeper. There were much more layers of sounds in between these two guys. When I was listening to some reference classical music, I felt that low intensity notes was slightly lower and higher intensity notes was slightly stronger. And that added a wider color gamut, a wider dynamic range, like the music was slightly livelier in a way. That was a very clear difference via I2S. It was like I wasn't watching a regular movie played back on stereo loudspeakers, but more like getting a Dolby Atmos experience with sounds coming from different angles. It felt like hearing additional details which was still there, but they weren't as defined before, so I couldn't focus on them. I had a very similar experience with the SMSL SU10. I felt that the noise floor went down, I felt that I had a much better layering, but this time around I felt a much more controlled bass output and a longer or a shorter decay, depending on the music, and let me explain. For example, when I was listening to classical music recorded in a big hall, I felt a very long trail of the music with the musical instruments via I2S. I felt echoes, the sounds were bouncing off the walls via I2S, but via USB that was a much shorter trail of the note. The notes were somehow fading away much faster, and that led to a less natural, lifelike presentation. And it was the other way around with electronica tunes. With Noisia, with Infected Mushroom, it was ramping up the pace, it was snappier sounding, it was faster sounding via I2S. And I felt that the bass wasn't as controlled, it felt that the bass wasn't as clean via USB. At first I believed that I2S was lowering a little bit the bass punch, but after a few minutes I just realized that I was getting a higher quality type of bass via I2S. The bass punch didn't suffer in the end, but its layering, decay and control improved tremendously. When I moved to a high performance DAC like this Gustard R26, to my surprise the improvements weren't really as massive as it was happening with SMSL devices. I felt that the bass was more controlled and tighter sounding, but other than that there weren't really big changes in between USB and I2S connection. What was a very solid 20% on SMSL devices felt up to 10% improvement on the R26 via I2S connection. I didn't feel that the layering was improved, I didn't feel that the noise floor went down, I just felt that the bass was clearer, tighter and faster sounding, and that was pretty much all. And as you can clearly see, a few DACs have a better noise rejection, they have a much better digital input board, so they will benefit less with a dedicated DDC like this one. So clearly this one will benefit, but not as much as those SMSL devices were doing. And the last DAC that I wanted to check via I2S is a very high-end one, which uses an advanced clocking system and noise rejection techniques. This one is called Rockna Wavedream Signature XLR. My wife was still swapping those cables, and after about 6 tunes, which were covering most musical genres, it was very clear to me that there was close to nothing in terms of, they sounded more or less the same, USB and I2S. Sometimes I felt that USB was better, sometimes it was the other way around. There was a very minor difference, but I wouldn't call it an improvement. And on the next day I tried a Rockna Wavedream Net, which improved this one to unrecognizable, but that one is a 10 grand unit. Yeah. Wrapping things up, it was clear to me that most digital to analog converters will get a performance boost with a unit like this, especially when used via I2S connection. If you don't have a DAC with an I2S connection, please don't worry, because it will still lower the incoming noise, it will still reclock the incoming signal, so you will still get some performance gains. It worked better with DACs costing below 2 grand, it worked great with older DACs, and if you have a high-end DAC, then the performance boost should be much lower. A unit like this will improve the sound of many DAC converters, not only of those that were tested around here. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as usual, listen to more tunes. be positive, and I'll see you around.